The Canadian government is looking to quell dissent by all means possible. We are seeing a theme and a trend over the past couple weeks of what this government is going after. We saw Sean Fraser in his hate bill, C9. And in that press conference, Sean Fraser really detailed out a handful of issues and a handful of symbolism that they were taking particular interest in. However, none of which seemed to be really reminiscent with what we are seeing on the ground here in Canada. That was number one. Then we had Melanie Joly introduce her Bill C8, which is going after organized crime that uses our telecommunications to facilitate crime. However, when you look into the bill, it actually says we can go after any individual we want, and actually we can kick them off and tell their internet service provider that they cannot provide service to them any longer. So again, more subjectivity and more vagueness coming in some of these bills. And then we also have as well, Guilbeault announced last week, our heritage minister, saying that he will be introducing an internet censorship bill to clamp down on hate speech and other things of that nature. This and so much more, we're going to get into all of it and how this all comes together and how this has all been coming for a very, very long time. And it's very sinister, the details of how all this is coming together. And I hope to really open your eyes and show you what's happening behind the curtain. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. If you get any value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us get to new audiences and helps people see that there's something different than what the mainstream media has to offer. And now, let's go into our first story, shall we? So I want to give credit to journalist Andy Lee, who's fantastic at what she does. I really love all the research she's been doing and what she's been uncovering, especially when it comes to the likes of China and their influence with the Liberal Party of Canada and so on. She's been doing great work for many years at this point. I want to give credit to her for pointing me in the right direction of what is currently happening in our country. You see this tweet here. A lost thread recovered from a long-censored account, how Canadian polling companies and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, receive federal funds to manufacture a censorship-worthy hate crisis to benefit liberal political censorship agendas. And this is the tweet that she's talking about, how polling companies and non-governmental organizations are receiving federal funds in exchange for influence to aid the government's push for internet regulation and censorship bills by manufacturing a divisive hate crisis. And admittedly, this all kind of caught my attention because I've been hearing about this happening in the States and the Democrats doing this through their NGOs down there and trying to push a specific narrative through the media. But I didn't realize it was also happening up here to the scale that it was currently happening. I'll show you what I mean. This is the first example that was given. From the Toronto Star, most Canadians are fed up with online hatred and discrimination and want to see Parliament act, new survey says. And Toronto Star and other publications took a survey that was done talking about how there's been such a rise with online hatred and discrimination that really only focused on one side of the political aisle, and they got pushed through our media. And this was a story that Andy Lee called out. The story on the Nanos poll read, most Canadians are fed up with online hatred and discrimination and want to see Parliament act. Nearly 4 in 5 Canadians support government creating legislation to combat serious types of harmful online content. You get that? So you have this message that was pushed that we need to quell online hatred and discrimination, and that this research poll was done that 4 in 5 Canadians want to see something done about it. Interesting. And again, Andy Lee pushing this forward says the poll stated a majority of about 70% of respondents showed concern about the rise of right-wing extremism. This is something we have heard a lot about lately, and extremism is always conveniently phrased as right-wing phenomenon. This is by design. The poll was commissioned by Nanos and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, which is described as an NGO that operates at arm's length to the government. CRRF's mandate is to create a Canada in which individual, institutional, and systemic racism are eliminated. So this is how it starts. So again, the CCRF commissions Nanos to do this poll for them. And they conveniently find that 4 in 5 Canadians see a rise in online hatred and discrimination. And it's all good because this CCRF is seen as an NGO, non-governmental organization that operates at an arm's length from the government. However, the whole board of this organization is appointed by the Minister of Heritage. So it works independently of the government. However, all the board members are picked by the Minister of Heritage. Okay, so arm's length from the government, but a Liberal gets to choose who gets to be part of the board and essentially influences indirectly what that work ends up being. Then that organization turns around and then funds this study. 4 in 5 Canadians want to see a rise in hatred online. And then he turns around and pushes that study into the media, making it seem like, whoa, wow, this is a huge issue. This is happening at scale. This is crazy. Fascinating, isn't it? And this was an example that Andy Lee gave that really put me on to this whole idea. Because then I came across this story. This isn't an isolated incident. We have the YWCA of Canada addressing online hate, which was a whole study, an initiative to figure out what is happening with hate online and being targeted towards minorities in our country. It says here, YWCA Canada releases 2022 Block Hate Research Report and polling data. YWCA Canada has authored a new report about online hate in Canada, which centers on the voices, lived experiences, and strategies shared by young women and gender diverse youth aged 16 to 30 years. Again, hate towards only specific groups of people. That is the mandate, that is the focus, and that is what they push forward. Then again, what I'm talking about is the government of Canada funds NGOs who then turn around and do these studies, which then get massively pushed into the media. We see it here at the end. All the media that has been done for this initiative. We see likes of representatives in government talking about it in their speeches. We have the CBC pushing it. We have the Canadian press pushing it, so on and so forth. Again, and this is an example of that story being pushed. Survey suggests 1 in 2 people of color have experienced online racism in Canada. They then cite the YWCA report for this information. And this was published across multiple outlets at various times. Again, pushing the idea that online hate towards specific minority groups is on the rise. Then we end up finding out that this initiative was funded to the tune of $700,000 by the federal government. I recently announced over $700,000 in funding to YWCA Canada for their project Block Hate, building resilience against online hate speech, which will strengthen the way Canadians respond to online hate, creating safer online spaces for young Canadians. This is how the system works, and this is how they manipulate Canadians and manipulate public perception of what is currently happening so they can gain more control of our country. This is just a handful of projects that they have funded over the years that keep pushing this idea of like, oh, we did this research poll. We did this survey. There's a rise of online hate coming from the right. Well, they may not say it's only coming from the right. Their research is very narrow that, oh, hate directed only at these groups. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And these research reports continue to push that very idea. Again, that is the system. Government funds these NGOs. NGOs has the money now to do these very focused research projects that only look at a specific subsect of society. And then that is taken, disseminated to the media, showing, well, there's such a rise, 4 in 5, 1 in 2 against minority groups, but in this group, against women, against people of color. And they never touch Antifa. They never touch hate towards Christian groups. It's always a specific subsector of our society to push a narrative. If you remember my coverage of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which is another group that, again, pushes a specific slant and only researches specific types of hate in Canada. They claim to be the Anti-Hate Network, yet they only research hate that is directed at what is perceived to be the left side of the aisle, or at least left-wing ideology adjacent. And they put forward a request for a budget to the Canadian government by the Canadian Anti-Hate Network back in August 4th, 2023. And these are the recommendations that they put forward. That the government committed $25 million a year for 5 years to an anti-hate action program to counter far-right organizing and its impacts as part of Canada's action plan on combating hate. Number 2, our second recommendation is that the government commit the necessary funding for Stats Canada to survey Canadians about hate crimes annually as part of the General Social Survey. Okay. And then number 3, that the government commit $1 million a year for 5 years to the Canadian Anti-Hate Network to give Canada an anti-hate watchdog organization on par with the SPLC in the USA, Hop Not Hate in the UK, and the Amadou Antonio Foundation in Germany. So here's the recommendations. This is how you can track hate, and then also we'll be your watchdog if you give us $1 million a year. We only research specific kinds of hate, but give us $1 million a year so we can track down these right-wing organizations that are doing it. That was their recommendations to the government of Canada. And this organization is viewed as a thought leader and a voice in hate in our country, and they are used and pushed in our media consistently. Anti-Hate Group calls for regulator to police social media platforms. CBC. Global News. Canadian Anti-Hate Network launches toolkit to combat hate in schools. Okay. Government of Canada and the Canadian Anti-Hate Network launched anti-hate toolkit for Canadian schools. Which, guess what? Only focused on specific kinds of hate. Didn't touch on far left violent hate. Didn't touch on Islamic extremism violent hate. No. It touched on hate towards visible minority groups in Canada. That's where the funding goes, and that's where the focus goes to. And this is all done to continue to push the narrative and continue to condition Canadian people into wanting Bill C9, Bill C8, and eventually Stephen Guilbeault's internet censorship bill. This has been going on for years at this point, and how the Canadian government has been using NGOs to prop up their narratives to finance manipulated research studies in order to push those research study results into the media. Because we know how this all works. People see, oh, study says, research finds, they automatically, without really even questioning it, oh, this is legitimate. It's all good. So now Canadians are conditioned now. And this is why you're having talks with your friends and your family. Oh, there's such a rise in far-right hate. There's such a rise in far-right extremism. It's crazy. And then you bring up things like Antifa. Who is that? That's a fake organization. Those guys don't even exist. I'm sure you had those conversations, haven't you? This is all being done on purpose. This is happening in the United States because the Democrats we're doing the exact same thing, propping up, using NGOs to create these research studies to then use that and push it into the media. And Canada's doing the exact same thing. All being done to push fear, division, in order for people to beg the government to please do something about it. Now we have Sean Fraser's hate crime bill. Now we have Melanie Joly's telecommunications bill. They can just shut down your internet service provider without any notice. And then we're going to have Guilbeault's internet censorship bill that's coming in shortly. This is all orchestrated. It's all planned. And this was all pushed by your liberal government in order so that they can seize more power and control over your voice and the narrative in this country. Or if we go back to the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, they are receiving another $200,000 to create an ethical framework for research on far-right organizing in Canada. And that started April 1st, 2024, and is extending through March 31st, 2026. $200,000 worth of funding into looking into far-right organizing in Canada. National Post did a piece on this, and the Canadian Anti-Hate Network is, well, questionable at best. They took journalists to court over them suggesting that the Canadian Anti-Hate Network has connections with Antifa. And we've been told, and it's consistently said, Antifa doesn't exist. Joe Biden said in the 2020 debate with Donald Trump, that's just an idea. We see the same attitude communicated by our Canadian politicians here in Canada. The Canadian Anti-Hate Network looked to sue these journalists over these statements. If Antifa doesn't exist, why would you have to sue them over it? On November 10th, the court dismissed a defamation lawsuit launched by lawyer Rich Warman, also a board member of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Warman sued journalists Jonathan and Barbara Kay for tweets that criticized the Khan's links to the Antifa movement in the United States, which has been covered by the C2C Journal and the Federalist. In the end, the judge ruled that the tweets weren't defamatory, which meant the Kays wouldn't be liable. Even if the tweets didn't meet the legal threshold to be considered defamatory, the case would have been saved by the legal defenses available. The judge said that the statements made had the benefit of being true, noting that the Canadian Anti-Hate Network did in fact assist Antifa and that the movement has been violent, and it would be reasonable to state that it is not a good look for a human rights organization to support a violent movement. If these allegations were so offensive and so untrue, and if Antifa is not a thing, why did you have to go and sue them over it? And this is stuff we're going to continue to look into because this is not the first time links have been established between the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and Antifa, which leads one to believe and wonder and question. Is the Liberal Party of Canada seeing Antifa as a tool to get what they need at the end of the day? If the Liberal government is so closely connected with the Canadian Anti-Hate Network that does such a biased job in terms of investigating hate in our country, and that organization has got some questionable links to Antifa, some would suggest, I would suggest, But the Liberal Party of Canada may see Antifa as a group that can do their dirty work that they can keep an arm's length from. Thus why they're not very quick to call out Antifa when they do questionable and very violent things. And so much so, when questioned about Antifa, our government says, they don't really even exist. That should tell you a lot. I'm not saying anything is certain. However, it leads one to question that very idea. But one last thing to remember is that we are in a minority government. These bills that are being brought forward aren't necessarily going to be passed. However, they do need our specific attention. And it's so very important to continue to keep your eyes on what is happening inside Parliament as these bills get pushed forward and debated in the House of Commons. It is so important to see and push the Conservative Party to continue to call this stuff out as they already are. It is important for you to also be talking about it, continue to make noise so that it forces this Liberal Party to recoil and push off of these crazy, controlling bills that they're looking to push forward. But anyways, that's it for me. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.